Sup nerds! Today we're looking at the MagicX 135, which is one of the more interesting looking handhelds that we've seen in a while. They have conveniently put all the specs here in the back of the box, so pause and read through it if you are interested. And this is a pretty thin box. So far, pretty standard. Do you notice something interesting? What about now? Hey! The overall aesthetics, aside from the many extra buttons, is reminiscent of the good old Dingu A320, though a little curvier, and the shell here looking a little bit cheaper and more plasticky than the Dingu. The power button is at the bottom, which it's pretty interesting, I guess.
Throwing flashbang.
Oh, at least the screen is bright, I guess. And right off the bat, we see a PS Vita on here. In fact, the very first rumors we had heard about this device was that this would be a sub $100 Android device that would be able to play Vita games. Which of course some of us were skeptical about back then and wondered if they meant PSP, hence just the one stick, but I'm getting ahead of myself. We can at least see that the speakers here, despite being bottom firing, are quite loud. But well, we'll test Vita games later. So yeah, this is the MagicX 135 Touch. What a name! And in the back we have the vent holes, which are purely for passive cooling. Pretty standard looking back with a logo and 4 screw holes. And at the bottom we can see 2 speaker grills / holes, a teeny tiny power button, which as we mentioned before isn't a very unusual placing here at the bottom, but okay, and the L button, interesting, and a headphone jack. Over here on the right side we have the SD card slot for expendable storage. On the left side there's the volume rocker, which is very clicky. And this is the top. As you can see there from left to right, there's the R1, R2, USB-C port, a R button, L2 and L1. On the front side, we have the left analog stick, which does click despite how small it is, the interesting dual D-pads, a home / back button, 4 face buttons, start and select, and just to mention, all of these buttons in the front are soft membranes, but the rest of them are not. The R button up top here is quite clicky and tough, same for the L button. The L1, L2 and R1 and R2 buttons on the top are quite clicky as well. It feels kind of weird, but they aren't protruding buttons. They're in line with the shell and you click into the shell. And as some of you may have guessed, this was designed to give you options to play vertically, like this, and apparently that allows for some DS play, allowing you to have the L and R buttons here on the sides. Now this is giving me strong WonderSwan vibes, but as you can probably guess, this is not the most comfortable way to play, but it is possible. Now, onto software. Their front end is the Dawn launcher. It's the same front end that their previous handheld was using, which we did show in this channel before, called the MagicX 040. So, you can go check that out later if you want. And design wise they are pretty similar, They're definitely reusing a lot of the assets they had from the last one, but they did spend quite a bit of time with this, it seems, as it comes pre-installed with a bunch of emulators and most of them are already pre-set up already. So a lot of this is just good out of the box, except it doesn't come with any ROMs. The OS has some nice settings. It has its own scraper, button testers, theme changer, and this nerd bucket has only been playing in the performance setting for the CPU manager, and it has been working quite well. We are actually quite surprised that this has been able to handle all of the Gamecube games that this nerd bucket has thrown at it so far, only not being able to handle the heavier stuff like F-Zero, and most of the PS2 games as well. The last one that this nerd bucket tried was Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater, and it was going at 20 out of 30 FPS, so the PS2 definitely seems to be the limit for this device, but quite a few games will work on it pretty well. But this nerd bucket only used the stock emulators that came with the device already, so if you tinker around with other emulators and settings, perhaps you can get better results and get even more games to work. This nerd bucket also likes some of the settings that they have in their launcher, like being able to set the CRT overlay across the board in RetroArch, or turning on and off the autosave/resume function. And since this can be a vertical device, a lot of the arcade shoot 'em up games will work well on this. And this option here is to actually map all the names correctly so that they will show up in a more organized fashion in your library. Oh, also, this is running a custom build of Android 12, so it mostly works. But this nerd bucket did notice a few issues here and there. One being the brightness setting. This is currently the lowest brightest setting. The extra dim is on, but the slider only changes a little bit. From the midpoint up. Then from midpoint down, as you can see, it hardly gets any darker. It would really be nice to get a little less brightness for the screen. The CPU manager that we saw before can be set globally across all apps or only specific apps in specific games, so that's nice for customization. Here they have their own rotate mode, so that you can specify certain apps that only work in 90-degree mode, which would mostly be for arcade games, so shoot 'em ups, vertical shooters, and the DS games. And this here is the switcher to change the ABXY to BAYX. Let's play some games now with the sound up. The sound here for Crazy Taxi will be muted because of copyright issues, of course, but the sound is on point, I can promise you that. No breaking up and no lagging.
Party time! Let's have some fun. All right, go ahead. Go ahead and pick a car and drive it.
This does have quite decent fast forward for PSP though. Oops. This thing probably can't handle 3DS very well. It was one of the few emulators that didn't come pre-set up. And Disney Bucket has experienced a lot of slow loading with shaders, and the screens weren't oriented correctly. And even then it was just too small to be a good experience anyway. Yeah, so probably won't be playing any 3DS games on this. But going back to DS, this is a pretty good experience. It auto-rotates the screens for you, but the emulator is also pre-set up, it works well with scaling, works with a ton of different filters on it, but I do guess the DS was one of the main reasons that they made this device. And as you heard, the volume is quite loud and decent quality. Now onto a Vita game. Like I mentioned before, when they first teased this device, they specifically said this would be able to play Vita games. And at least with Gravity Rush, which happens to be one of my favorite games for the Vita, it seems to be working quite well. And now that we've shown everything this baby is capable of, let's talk about some issues that this nerd bucket has noticed during this time that he has been testing this device. One thing he mentioned was that this device was thicker than he had anticipated and not as comfortable as he had hoped for the DS, just because how stiff the side L and R buttons were to press, specifically compared to the other buttons, which are very soft and easy to press. And hence it is a little difficult to press with your index fingers in this position. And since this is a custom build Android, he's noticed a few bugs, such as even though you can just use the Dawn launcher to check for apps and launch them from there, he was used to going through the settings to do so. But if you try that here, it crashes the setting when you try to find an app. You may also have noticed in the intro that we tried to launch a game that came with it for the Vita, but that it just infinitely got stuck in the loading screen. Well, he checked the file and it was just 16 bytes, so we doubt it was a real game, just a leftover file from testing probably. Another one is that with the installed emulators, he has also noticed that though it may have been on his part, that the RetroArch settings randomly switched on him at some point, and he's not sure how that happened. So now A and B is now X and Y. But that's something that he can and will probably go through and change in RetroArch later, because he also wants to take out the FPS counter from the GBA, but it is set to show for every emulator. And as you can see here, the D-pad here is not set, so none of the presses is registering, but the stick is, but it doesn't remember ever messing with the controls for the GBA here, which of course for us nerds is not that big of a deal. We know how to change that back, but for people who may have wanted a working handheld out of the box, might feel that this is a bigger frustration for them than it is for us. And as nice as this front end is, this nerd bucket thinks that a bit more effort could have been put into it, since as you can see that for the 3DS, you just have a random default background, whereas for the Dreamcast, they have a Dreamcast themed game background. For the GBA, they do have a GBA themed game background. But Gamecube, like the 3DS, doesn't have its own background. And 64 here has the creepiest looking banjo that we have ever seen before. And so on for these other screens, and it just feels a little bit inconsistent, but it was the exact same way on the original MagicX 040. The scraper is also nice, but it doesn't always work, so for a lot of the games, this nerd bucket had to go in and scrape things for himself after adding the ROMs. And it does think that he lost around 4% battery in the normal sleep mode overnight, which isn't terrible. It's pretty standard for Android devices, but definitely something that you should consider if you are thinking of buying it. And we haven't tested it yet, but we do think that the battery life will be quite stellar, because this nerd bucket opened this device up to see why it was so thick, and noticed that a big part of it was just one big battery in there. There is still a lot of space because of how slim the motherboard is, but there's a big boy battery taking up at least the length of this device. Oh, and another point this nerd bucket made is that it is supposed to have a simple USB-C MTP transfer for files with a computer, but he just couldn't get it to work. He tried it on all of his USB hubs with several different cables, but none of them worked, so he had to do the transfer through the micro SD. Which, again, it is not a big problem for us nerds, especially because this nerd bucket will probably change the front end to Emulation Station or RetroArch, and then put all of his games on the SD card anyway. But since it comes with 64GB of internal storage, it would be nice to be able to use it. Oh, almost forgot. But the last issue that this nerd bucket noticed is that on the button tester, the stick works pretty well, but as you can see, it does have cardinal snapping. It is not too egregious. If you do go slowly, you can still hit the corners, but it does try its best to hit the 8 cardinal direction, which of course, again, is not that big of a deal. It is not uncommon amongst cheaper handhelds, but just something to consider. Overall, it could run a lot of games up to PS2 games. It feels great. Of course, it could have used better button types like we mentioned, but pretty great other than that, especially for its price. or at least even for the novelty of having this many buttons and a handheld that can change to vertical on the go. But yeah, that's all we had to show and say about the MagicX 135. I still wonder if this is what the majority of the team voted for as the name of their devices, or if it is just one person who decided this. But anyway, what do you think? Do you think this device is as cool as we thought it was? Let us know in the comments down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Consider helping the channel out by clicking join down below to become a member. Subscribe to see more videos like this, and of course, always nerd on.